The Fetterman Encounter, the Battle of the Hundred in the Hands, Red Cloud's War. Let's have this conversation. In December 1866, amidst Red Cloud's War, a conflict ignited by American expansion into the Powder River region, a coalition of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors engaged the U.S. Army in a courageous effort to safeguard their territory and way of life. Crazy Horse, along with 10 of his warriors, successfully enticed Captain William Fetterman's patrol from Fort Philkerny into a lethal ambush. The Fetterman Encounter, recognized as one of the most pivotal confrontations of the war, resulted in the loss of 81 U.S. soldiers within mere minutes. This battle served as a response from the Native Americans to previous incursions on treaty lands, particularly following earlier military assaults such as the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864. The confrontation took place near Fort Philkerny, which was situated on land designated by the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. This treaty initiated the process of restricting the land available to Native Americans in the Great Plains. It was signed by the United States and the Northern Plains Native tribes, allocating specific areas of Nebraska, South Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming as exclusive Native territories. The agreement mandated that Plains tribes would cease intertribal conflicts, establish boundaries for each tribe, and compensate the U.S. government if any tribal members violated these stipulations. The U.S. Army was authorized to construct roads, military installations, and other posts within the treaty-designated lands, while other settlers were prohibited from entering these areas. In exchange, the U.S. government pledged to protect the Plains natives from encroachment by white Americans and committed to providing $50,000 annually for a decade, with the possibility of extending support for an additional 5 years. Numerous challenges arose during the formation of the agreement. Firstly, the U.S. government struggled to identify a representative from each tribe who could adequately voice the concerns of their entire community. Secondly, attendance at the meetings was inconsistent, with some tribes opting not to participate. Additionally, establishing definitive territorial boundaries for each Native tribe proved to be a complex task. Native societies traditionally did not maintain fixed land boundaries, as they frequently migrated to hunt buffalo and gather resources. Furthermore, the treaty was drafted in English, a language that many Native representatives did not fully comprehend, leading to misunderstandings regarding their commitments. Tensions in the area began to escalate in 1863 when John Bozeman forged the Bozeman Trail, a new route for immigrants heading to the gold fields of Montana. This 680-mile trail raised legal concerns as it traversed lands that the government had previously guaranteed to the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Lakota, and Crow tribes under the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. These lands were among the last remaining prime hunting territories for the tribes, abundant with deer, elk, and mountain sheep. The influx of wagon trains disrupted traditional hunting practices, while draft animals and livestock consumed vast areas of grassland. In response to the encroachment of settlers, Native Americans began launching attacks against them. The situation intensified following the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, where Colorado militiamen killed and mutilated approximately 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho individuals, including men, women, and children. This atrocity prompted Native Americans to retaliate against white settlers throughout the plains, including those traveling along the Bozeman Trail. In 1865, the Little Arkansas Treaty was signed by leaders of various Plains tribes in an attempt to establish peace. However, this treaty failed to achieve its goal as hostilities persisted and many tribal chiefs chose not to endorse it. In 1866, the government summoned thousands of Lakota to Fort Laramie to negotiate a treaty that would ensure safe passage for settlers on the Bozeman Trail. Notable Native chiefs, including Red Cloud, were in attendance. Simultaneously, Colonel Henry B. Carrington arrived at the location with the mission of safeguarding emigrants journeying westward along the Bozeman Trail. He commanded a force of 700 soldiers accompanied by 300 civilians. The presence of Carrington's troops incited anger in Lakota Chief Red Cloud, who asserted that the Army aimed to seize native lands and consequently refused to endorse the treaty. Following his declaration, he departed, with other chiefs and warriors choosing to accompany him. In response, the U.S. government initiated the construction of several forts along the Bozeman Trail, with Fort Philkerny being the most significant and largest. This fort was established in the same year in north-central Wyoming under Carrington's leadership, where he, along with 400 soldiers and the majority of civilians, was stationed. During an expedition from Fort Philkerny, Carrington encountered Lakota Chief Standing Elk. Although Standing Elk's people were inclined towards peace, he informed Carrington that certain Lakota bands in the Powder River region had not agreed to the treaty terms established at Fort Laramie in 1851. He also conveyed that the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes were in support of the Lakota. That year marked a peak in native discontent towards both the Army and the emigrants. Red Cloud was resolute in his determination to confront any challenges rather than submit. In his address, he proclaimed, "Hear ye, Dakotas! When the Great Father in Washington dispatched his chief soldier to request a passage through our hunting grounds for his iron road leading to the mountains and the western sea, we were assured that they intended only to traverse our territory without lingering, seeking gold in the distant west. Our elder chiefs believed they were demonstrating friendship and goodwill by allowing this perilous presence among us, promising to safeguard the travelers. Before the embers of the council fire have cooled, the Great Father is constructing his forts among us. You have heard the sound of the white soldier's axe striking the small pines. His presence here is both an affront and a menace. It is a disrespect to the spirits of our forebears. Are we to surrender their hallowed graves to be tilled for corn? Dakotas, I advocate for war. Many warriors responded to this call. Lakota warriors, alongside their Cheyenne and Arapaho allies in the Powder River region, initiated what became known as Red Cloud's War. Under the leadership of Red Cloud and Crazy Horse, they concentrated their assaults on Fort Philkerny, persistently harassing the soldiers and raiding their wood and supply convoys. The fort's reliance on fresh timber was its vulnerability. The nearest suitable forest was located approximately 4 miles west of the fort. Native forces frequently ambushed supply wagons, even those heavily guarded. From July onward, Carrington documented 51 skirmishes in which Red Cloud's men tested the fort's defenses. Between August and mid-December 1866, the natives killed over 70 soldiers and civilians in the vicinity of Fort Philkerny. Raiding parties made off with around 700 government horses, mules, and cattle. In November, a cavalry unit of 63 men arrived to bolster the post. This cavalry unit was commanded by Lieutenant Horatio S. Bingham, accompanied by infantry captains William J. Fetterman and James W. Powell. On December 6, 1866, the natives launched an attack on a wagon train near the fort. A relief party was dispatched, with Fetterman leading 40 men and Carrington planning to encircle the natives with 25 men. Crazy Horse realized he could lure a small group of soldiers into an ambush by feigning retreat, leaving them vulnerable. Carrington and his soldiers pursued them. The small group of natives was unexpectedly reinforced by additional warriors, bringing their total to 100. They swiftly turned to confront Carrington's forces, engaging in close combat that persisted for several minutes. Under intense pressure, the natives managed to rout the soldiers, resulting in the deaths of 3. However, Fetterman intervened, providing crucial support to Carrington's men. The natives retreated, unaware of the number of soldiers pursuing them alongside Fetterman. The extent of the natives' casualties remains unclear. Observing the soldiers' impulsive actions, Crazy Horse and Red Cloud speculated that a significantly larger force could potentially be lured into a similar fatal trap. Conversely, Carrington adopted a more cautious approach. He resolved to suspend wood-cutting operations, determining that the wood train scheduled to depart on December 21st would be the final one until spring. Prior to the impending battle, Red Cloud summoned the Lakota's most esteemed two-spirit individual, believed to possess unique abilities, to provide counsel from a vantage point overlooking the planned ambush location. This individual rode frantically on his pony 4 times between the warriors assembled on the hill and Lodge Trail Ridge, each time gathering more soldiers. Upon his 4th return to Red Cloud, he had amassed 100 bluecoat soldiers, a number too great to contain. The Lakota interpreted this as a favorable omen that assured their victory, subsequently naming it the Battle of the 100 in the Hands. On the morning of December 21st, as 1,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors awaited with anticipation a wagon train consisting of 30 soldiers and 65 armed civilian teamsters escorting 35 wagons set out. An hour later, at 10 a.m., the natives launched their attack on the train. Inside Fort Philkerny, Captain Powell was preparing to lead a relief mission. Fetterman approached and insisted on taking command of the expedition. He was joined by Lieutenant George W. Grumman and Captain Brown. Carrington acquiesced to Fetterman's request, placing him in charge of a total of 80 men, which included 49 infantry, 27 cavalry, and 2 civilians. Fetterman commanded the infantry on foot, while Grumman led the cavalry. Carrington instructed his troops to support the wood train, provide assistance, and report back to him. He specifically directed them not to engage or pursue the natives at the expense of Fetterman. Under no circumstances were they to pursue beyond Lodge Trail Ridge. Fetterman departed from the fort at approximately 11:15 a.m. Shortly after his departure, the natives disengaged and began to withdraw, allowing the wagons to continue their journey to the timbering site. Since no medical officers were present with the wood train or Fetterman's patrol, Carrington called upon C.M. Hines, an assistant surgeon contracted by the U.S. Army. The colonel instructed Hines to accompany the wagon train and attend to any casualties he encountered. Additionally, he was to attempt to catch up with Fetterman if feasible. With the wood train no longer under threat, Fetterman turned his attention to the 10 mounted warriors who were mocking the soldiers. These warriors were led by Crazy Horse, and Fetterman pursued them past the eastern slopes of the hills. The warriors gradually made their way toward Lodge Trail Ridge. As Crazy Horse and his riders vanished beyond the ridge, Grumman and the cavalry advanced ahead of the infantry. They opened fire, successfully bringing down several native riders. The decoys crossed the frozen expanse of Pennow Creek, splitting into 2 groups that initially rode away from each other before turning back and crossing paths. This maneuver signaled the attack from the 1,000 concealed natives. The warriors emerged from their hidden positions in the grass and brush, unleashing a volley of arrows. A few natives charged directly at the soldiers but were shot down. Civilians Wheatley and Fisher dismounted, joined by several cavalrymen. They sought refuge behind large rocks and some deceased ponies, while the remainder of the cavalry began a southward retreat, reaching a ridge adorned with rocks and boulders. During this retreat, Grumman was shot and killed. Those positioned to the north engaged in combat for a few minutes before being overwhelmed and killed. Native warriors, primarily engaged in foot combat across the snowy and icy landscape, confronted their adversaries, resulting in significant casualties among them. A small contingent of cavalry managed to penetrate the encircling forces and reached Fetterman, who was attempting to regroup his infantry behind a cluster of boulders. Meanwhile, a group predominantly composed of Lakota ascended the eastern slope of the ridge to launch an assault on Fetterman, while additional warriors closed in, encircling the soldiers. Intense hand-to-hand combat erupted. Within a span of 20 minutes, the native forces had killed the soldiers, with many succumbing to war clubs and lances in the final moments of the confrontation. Captain Brown took his own life, while Fetterman succumbed to multiple slash wounds to his chest and throat. Lakota Chief American Horse knocked Fetterman to the ground and fatally stabbed him. The remaining cavalrymen from Grumman struggled across the icy terrain until they found refuge among a cluster of boulders. To the south, they beheld a vast assembly of warriors, cut off from the fort. Their horses had been driven away. It was only a matter of minutes before the last soldier fell. The battle spanned approximately 40 minutes, resulting in the deaths of Fetterman's entire command, totaling 81 men. Estimates suggest that native casualties ranged from 13 to 60. Only a handful of soldiers exhibited signs of gunshot wounds. The majority of the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors engaged in the battle were equipped with traditional weaponry, including bows, lances, tomahawks, and clubs. The victorious warriors desecrated and mutilated the fallen. All soldiers, with the exception of one, were treated in this manner. The body of Adolf Metzger remained untouched after his death, with his bugle found nearby. Dented and damaged, the bugle had evidently served as a makeshift war club in Metzger's final moments. His corpse was discovered draped in a Lakota buffalo robe, a gesture of respect for his bravery. Back at Fort Philkerny, just before noon, the garrison was alerted to the sound of gunfire. Hines quickly returned with alarming information. He had managed to travel only as far as a hill located some distance from the fort. Upon witnessing a large number of native warriors and finding no sign of Fetterman's men, he rushed back. In response, Carrington ordered 75 soldiers under Captain Tenador Tenike to assist the beleaguered detachment. Shortly after Tenike departed the fort, the colonel sent an additional 40 men to reinforce them. Approximately 3 miles from the fort, Tenike paused on elevated ground to the right of the road. From this vantage point, Tenike's troops could only observe the extensive native force who were celebrating their triumph. The warriors mocked the soldiers, challenging them to descend and engage in battle. However, neither side initiated an attack, and the native warriors began to move westward. No further combat would take place that day. The Fetterman battle was part of the early stages of Red Cloud's War, which lasted until 1868. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe. I will be discussing additional battles from this conflict in future content.